Charlie Chaplin is a movie legend, a man who made millions laugh. But behind his image of a cheerful tramp was a complicated life full of secrets and scandals. In this video, we'll tell you exactly what he was hiding from the public. Charlie was born in 1889 in London. His parents were artists, but his father left the family when the boy was only 3 years old. He almost did not help with money and soon died of alcoholism. Charlie's mother, a former singer, suffered from mental illness and often lost her job. The family lived in terrible poverty. They could eat one piece of bread a day, and sometimes Charlie and his brother Sidney went hungry. When their mother couldn't cope at all, the boys were taken to an orphanage. It was a terrible place, cold, hunger, and strict rules. Food was given out on a schedule, and if you didn't eat your portion, you were left hungry. Charlie went to different orphanages several times because his mother was constantly losing her place. But even in those circumstances, Charlie knew how to enjoy the little things. He loved to watch street performers on the street, and even then dreamed of becoming one. When Chaplin was about 5 years old, his mother went on stage for the last time. She lost her voice and the audience began to whistle. Little Charlie ran on stage to protect her and unexpectedly caused delight in the audience. It was the first time he realized he could make people laugh. A few years later, he got a job at the theater, but not as an actor, but as an assistant. One day, however, one of the actors fell ill and Charlie had to replace him. He played the role so well that the audience gave him a standing ovation. After that, he already began to be invited to other performances, and life went uphill. Chaplin was a movie genius, but in his personal life he was surrounded by scandals. He was loved by millions of women, but he chose those who were much younger than him. In Hollywood, he gained notoriety, and one affair even brought him to court. Chaplin several times fell in love with girls who had just turned 16 years old. In those days, it was not considered unusual, but even then Hollywood whispered about his strange tastes. The most high-profile case is his latest, fourth wife, Una O'Neill. When they met, she was 17 and he was 53. She was the daughter of the famous playwright Eugene O'Neill, and her father was furious with this union. He even severed all ties with her and abandoned his daughter. However, Chaplin and Una lived together for the rest of his life and gave birth to 8 children. But not all his relationships ended happily. In 1943, actress Joan Barry said that Chaplin, the father of her child. Charlie himself denied it, but the court decided otherwise. At that time, there were no DNA tests, and paternity tests were conducted by blood type. The results showed that Chaplin could not physically be the father, but the court decided to ignore the science. Chaplin was eventually forced to pay child support for someone else's child. The trial ruined his reputation, and the newspapers turned him into a villain. But the lawsuit wasn't Chaplin's only problem. One day, he found himself in the crosshairs of the American government. His movies collected millions of dollars, and he himself was considered a genius of cinema. But suddenly, he went from being an idol to an enemy of the state. It all began in 1940, when Chaplin released the movie The Great Dictator. It was a satire on Hitler and fascism. The public was delighted, but the US government was wary. In the movie, Chaplin openly mocked totalitarian regimes and talked about freedom and equality. It looked noble, but a few years later, at the height of the hunt for communists, these same ideas began to work against him. After the war, a struggle against leftist views began in the United States. All those who advocated social justice were suspected of sympathizing with communism. Chaplin was on that list. He began to be accused of supporting the Soviet Union, spreading dangerous ideas, and even spying against America. The FBI collected files on him for 20 years. The government was watching his every move. Chaplin's dossier was 1,900 pages long, recording all of his speeches, meetings, and even rumors about him. Newspapers began to publish articles that made him look like an enemy of America. In 1952, Chaplin traveled to Europe for the premiere of his new movie. He didn't realize he could never go back. While he was abroad, U.S. authorities canceled his visa. He was not officially deported, but they put a condition. If he wanted to return, he had to prove his political trustworthiness. Chaplin refused and stayed in Switzerland, but 20 years later, the unexpected happened. In 1972, the American Film Academy decided to return Chaplin his status as a legend and invited him to the awarding of an honorary Oscar for his contribution to cinema. By then, Chaplin was 83 years old and had not appeared in public for a long time. When Chaplin received the formal invitation, he took a long time to respond. He remembered how he had been betrayed, how he had been made an enemy of the United States and denied the right to return. Many thought he would refuse, but eventually he agreed to come. Perhaps he wanted to put a beautiful end to his history with Hollywood. At the Oscars ceremony, Chaplin appeared accompanied by his wife, Una. When he took the stage, the audience stood up and began to applaud. The ovation lasted 12 minutes, the longest ovation in Oscar history. Chaplin, who had once been ousted, returned as a triumphant man, and America stood to apologize to him. He looked touched and said, "Thank you for the honor of returning." There was irony in his voice. He was well aware that these same people had turned their backs on him 20 years earlier. Chaplin accepted the award, but he never stayed in the United States. A few days later, he flew back to Switzerland, where he lived the rest of his life. America wanted him back, but he never fully forgave her. Charlie Chaplin was known all over the world, but here is the paradox. No one knew who he really was. His name is written in history, but there are no official documents about his birth. Who is he? Why couldn't even British intelligence find his birth certificate? Normally, everyone has a document to prove their date and place of birth. But when British intelligence decided to check the biography of Chaplin, it turned out that his birth certificate simply disappeared. It was not listed in any archives. Moreover, no one could confirm where and when he was born. This caused a lot of rumors. Officially, he was born in 1889 in London, but Chaplin himself once stated that his real homeland was a gypsy van. According to him, he was the son of a gypsy woman who lived in a tabor traveling through England. That would explain why he had no birth records. Among nomadic peoples in those days, documents were often withheld. If this is true, it turns out that one of the most influential people in Hollywood was of gypsy descent. In those years, gypsies were hated and discriminated against, so Chaplin could hide his real history to avoid prejudice. But if his birth is shrouded in mystery, his death has created even more mysteries. Charlie Chaplin made people laugh all his life, but his last years were far from comedy. He found himself in exile, lost touch with Hollywood, and saw his last works fail. Chaplin lived in Switzerland in a luxurious mansion, but his health was deteriorating. Parkinson's disease, fatigue, frustration. By the age of 70, he hardly ever left the house. Chaplin dreamed of making another great movie, but his last work, The Countess of Hong Kong, failed at the box office. It was the first movie where he did not play himself, but only directed. The main roles were played by Marlon Brando and Sophia Loren. Audiences were waiting for a masterpiece, but the movie was boring and unsuccessful. The failure of the movie was a heavy blow to Chaplin. After that, he never made a movie again. In his last years, he lived quietly, away from Hollywood. On December 25, 1977, Christmas Day, Chaplin died in his sleep. He was buried in a small cemetery in Switzerland. But even after his death, he was not left alone. 3 months after his funeral, his grave was opened and his body was stolen. The kidnappers demanded a ransom of $600,000 from the family. but they were quickly found and arrested. It turned out that it was two unlucky mechanics who wanted to get rich. Charlie Chaplin was not just an actor. He was a human legend. He started out poor, conquered the world, but found himself betrayed by the country that made him great. But despite all the difficulties, Chaplin remained a symbol of laughter and humanity. He showed that even the hardest times can be survived with a smile.